All right. Good morning, everyone. It is 11:33. We're going to get this show started. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Newson and I'm a partner here at BOS. We were hoping to be sharing this presentation with you in person. Alas, it was not to be so. We miss seeing all of you and we wish you well, and we hope that you are safe. I would like to express our collective gratitude to the clients of the firm attending today. We are so very grateful for the opportunity to serve you, your families, and those that you care about. Thank you. Let's see, next slide here. Please take a moment and read the disclosures on this slide associated with today's presentation. And okay. This webinar is the second of a two-part BOS webinar series designed to cover advanced aspects of personal cybersecurity, including home network setups and endpoints. This webinar is the 300-level course. We have also gathered questions from you when you registered, and we'll cover answers to those questions and from the chat as we proceed throughout today's program. And I have some good news. In an effort to make this series more relevant and actionable, we have also developed a cybersecurity best practices ebook, which we will make available to each of you after today's program. It is 16 pages full of information, including checklists of actions you can take today to increase your cybersecurity game. Leading today's discussion will be my fellow partner, Carol Benz. Carol is the firm's president and chief operating officer and oversees many strategic areas of the firm, including human capital, legal and compliance, as well as our technology stack. Please welcome Carol Benz.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and with our special guest speaker, Dr. Neil, and of course, all of our clients and guests. Welcome. We're going to dive deeper today into the world of cybersecurity, and our conversation will hopefully prove engaging and informative, and especially relevant given the recent news regarding a notable security breach at Apple. I'm sure you all heard of it. The breach was characterized as both a zero-day vulnerability and a zero-click exploit, terms I think we're starting to become a little bit more accustomed to hearing in the news. A zero-day vulnerability refers to bugs that hackers can exploit because they've been discovered, but they haven't yet been patched. So it's that little moment in time when they can take advantage of a vulnerability that has not yet been fixed. And zero-click exploit refers to the fact that the victims of the hack did not have to take any action. They didn't have to click on a malicious file or take any particular action that caused them to be victims. Kind of a deadly combination for sure. Apple has, of course, since released an emergency software update, but the breach really underscores the need to be aware of and to mitigate cybersecurity risks with our devices and with our home networks as much as is possible. So the good news is that there is a lot that we can do. So today's agenda will focus on 4 key areas. First, email. We all use email all day long. It's one of the most important tools in our lives, but it's also one of the most vulnerable. So Dr. Neil will address ways to configure your email to increase security. Second, each of your devices, whether it be your phone, your laptop, your desktop, is considered an endpoint. An endpoint is essentially a computing device that communicates back and forth with the network or a network, and which holds assets that could be valuable to a cyber criminal. These assets can be exploited to either steal money or demand a ransom, or even just cause havoc. Dr. Neil will spend some time speaking about what protections you can implement to reduce the vulnerability of your endpoints. Third, our home networks. Our home networks are an extremely attractive ground for cyber criminals, and Dr. Neil will discuss elements of a well-protected home network that you can implement. And lastly, Dr. Neil will take us through a lightning round of hot cybersecurity buzzwords, so kind of a what you need to know list to make you well prepared. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tanya Neal. Dr. Neal is a computer scientist and an entrepreneur. She's a self-proclaimed geek, and she earned a bachelor's in mathematics and computer science from Emory. a master's in computer science from the University of Maryland, and she wasn't quite done yet. So she then did her PhD in computer engineering from Northwestern. She began her career as an applied scientist for the National Security Agency and went on to serve as the Chief Technology Officer for both Private Client Services and then InvestNet prior to founding Infograte. Infograte is an information technology consulting company and she currently serves as its CEO. An experienced hands-on programmer and technology expert and even hacker, Dr. Neild focuses a great deal of her time and energy on the wealth management cybersecurity field. So her expertise is very relevant to BOS and our clients. Her deep technical knowledge is paired with a wonderful pragmatism and realism, so I think you'll enjoy hearing from her today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tanya Neild. And Tanya, we look forward to having you educate us first on how to shore up the security of our email.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carol and David. I appreciate you including me in today's presentation. This is a 300 series, so I'm going to touch on a couple of the basics as a refresher, but there was a prior seminar if you want to go into some of the more basic things. This is going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the, as we say, 300 level series types topics that you can do to protect yourself. Obviously, as Carol mentioned, email is the heart of what so many people do today, email and texting, using either Office 365 or the G Suite being the big two. If you are not using one of those two, you may want to consider it because they come with many more controls and options around security. So if you're on AOL or Yahoo or some other version, then you may want to think about going to a business level email system where some of these things can then be included. This slide here is kind of a checklist. As David mentioned, there's going to be follow-on materials where you can go through here. Starting kind of on the right-hand column there, those are kind of the basics that you should do at a minimum. MFA. That's multi-factor, and here it is two-factor. I want to introduce you to the concept of conditional factor, being able to remotely wipe your phone or your laptop, making sure that you're logging where access is coming from, making sure that if you use the Gmail, that you can actually have the confidential mode, making sure that your iPhone and your computers lock out after failed attempts, making sure that you have alerts if a new device has tried to access your email. Obviously, phishing attempts, those are email campaigns designed to have you click on something such that you fall for it, enter your credentials, or go someplace where there's particular access. Approve and denied lists, those are kind of places that you block access or approve access, trusted sites or trusted email lists. You may want to block ones that spam you quite frequently. Your spam obviously does catch a number of those, but they do come in and you'd want to block them. Now we're starting to get into a little bit more of the complicated ones. So I'm not going to quite click on run through all of these because it would be too fast. I did pick a couple of them that I wanted to go into a little bit more detail. So the first one is the conditional multi-factor. A conditional multi-factor means that I don't have to get annoyed. Many people go, oh my gosh, every time I get email, I don't want to have to, two-factor in because I'm in and out of my email every 15 minutes or every hour or what have you. And it would be so annoying if every time I wanted to check an email, I got hit with a two-factor. So there are conditions that you can put in it. And I think many times people just kind of throw it away and say that's annoying. But now we've got more practical and we can actually do this kind of conditional. And so there are different conditions. You can do conditions based on devices. So I can say, hey, if I'm on my phone or my computer, I've protected my phone and my computer, maybe I just need to two-factor once a day, or maybe I just need to two-factor once a day from my phone and once a month from my computer, because my computer's most of the time sitting at home and I know no one's taken it from there. Those are device-centric conditions. There are also ones based on geography. So maybe I don't want to ever have to two-factor if I'm in my house. Like, that's awfully annoying. You should be able to figure out that I'm sitting in the same place, or I'm sitting in my summer house or whatever. Like, please don't make me two-factor from there. Also, you could say, hey, look, if this is coming from outside the United States, you should probably make me two-factor even if it is on my phone. And so you can set up different conditions based on your geography or your device. Strangely enough, people somehow have done this on Netflix. So you may be running Netflix and you realize, hey, your kid just logged in from their computer, and it sends you a little email and says, did you just try logging in from a new computer? And I find it so interesting that people are doing this with Netflix automatically and then skipping it for their phone. So we want to be very consistent. Obviously, the email has more important information than what the heck you're watching on Netflix. So we should try to apply those same type of rules over. So please don't just throw two-factor out or kill yourself two-factoring every single time you try to get into email. We can strike a very nice blend in Gmail or in Office 365 using these conditional two factors. That condition can be applied to other applications. So in Office 365, there's a platform, Intune, which can help you have a single point of entry to other applications if you use them. Not all applications are there. More are coming in, so you don't have to kind of remember all of your passwords. If you log in there, then it by definition can get you into a handful of places, and you can apply that same kind of conditional access through to other applications and kind of set it up and manage it all in one place, or better yet, have your managed service provider, your IT person actually set that up, and then you know it's very consistent. All the applications within that suite can be protected even if it's a third-party application. So your Netflix already has it, but maybe you have a database that you share with someone. Maybe it's your banks aren't yet there, but many different applications will be able to be pulled in there. So that's a very important one. The second one is on your phone, being able to say which applications, which devices, and which third parties can actually have access. So you'd want to review that list. Sometimes people assume because they do it at the highest level in the settings that it permeates through and down. That's not always the case. And just because you set it once doesn't mean that you shouldn't review it. And just because you set it once, sometimes when you're going through and you're updating your operating system or you're updating your phones because of the Apple threat, you'll see that they've actually changed the settings back to default. So it's a very good practice to kind of on a monthly basis, assume that you should just quickly sweep through there, take 5 minutes and just sweep through, or have your kid do it, or have your tech person do it. Just sweep through, give them the phone for 5 minutes and check the settings, not just at the highest level, but the other levels. That could be your Uber app, that can be your, Grubhub, that can be your Netflix, that can be your Amazon app. Lots of apps are trying to access your email or access other content. And so you really want to be very specific. Sometimes it's just your location, but other times it's actually trying to access your email or your calendar, which by definition is your email. So when people think email, they might just think their inbox, but that's often your contacts, your calendar, and your email. And so you want to be very deliberate about when you're giving your contacts to these third-party apps. They are trying to make it a little bit more easy for you. So if you're in Uber, for example, and they have access to your contacts, you can say, oh, I'm going to visit Carol. I know where Carol lives, and it'll immediately pull in her address. So it is trying to give you a little bit of an integration feel, but you want to be very deliberate about which application has access to all of your contacts, all of your calendar, your location, your email. So again, you can approve it by application, and you can approve it by device and say which devices actually have access to any of those things. And then there are third parties, which are kind of behind an application that may also be trying to access it. So you want to look at it from your endpoint perspective and say, okay, here are all the apps on my endpoint, meaning my phone or my workstation. where are they trying to get it? And then you also want to cross-reference it and say, oh, I'm sitting in Gmail, or I'm sitting in Outlook, I'm sitting in Office 365, where from that perspective is it? So you want to look at both, because if you look from the Google Outlook perspective, you may see a phone that is an old phone of yours, or a phone you don't recognize trying to access it. You wouldn't obviously see that if you were sitting on your phone saying, hey, what on my phone has access to my email? So you need to actually look at it from both perspectives, both from the perspective of the Outlook system or contacts, calendar, email, the Google, and then your phone. The third one that I think is important, and a lot of companies have made a great effort here in trying to teach you about phishing campaigns. So this is a statistics game. The hacker sends out a ton of emails. They'll send out literally millions of emails. Yes, a ton are going to get bounced back. A lot of them will get caught in spam. A couple of them get through, and even a couple less get clicked on. But if you click on it, it actually does create a problem. And so what people have created are little systems that will sit basically in your email and say, hey, look, if someone's sending you a link, before I send you to that link, if you do click on it, I'm going to send you to my safe server, and I'm going to validate that that link is actually decent and good. So it's actually at the time of clicking that you're being checked, and it's redirecting you so you don't directly go to that site. It's relatively inexpensive to set up this, and it just depends on how cognizant you are. You may be great about not clicking on links, but maybe your child is not as strong and they're more trusting, and they're like, oh, whatever, yeah, it's probably that game thing or whatever, and they may trust it and go right on out. So you want to think about not only yourself, but your loved ones around you, and if they're as strong at clicking on the links or not clicking on the links. That also goes to the attachments. So oftentimes people will just put the attachment in the email, which is great and fabulous. You don't want to have to go off and necessarily retrieve it, but maybe that attachment isn't safe. So that same system that kind of says, hey, look, yeah, there was a small chance it got through, and an even smaller chance that you click on a bad link. But if you do, it's quite damaging. They will also do that same thing for attachments. So if Carol sends you an attachment for your, financial statement or whatever, which I'm sure she wouldn't do, whatever it is, you can click on it. It will still allow you to go there, but it's going to screen it and say, hey, is there anything in this PDF that looks suspicious? And it's not that they're looking at the content within the PDF. They're actually looking for the malware, the ransomware, et cetera. So they're looking for executables and actually bad things that can be sitting within a PDF document as opposed to the content of the document. And that's the same system there that allows you to link redirect and can pre-scan all of your attachments at the time of opening. And so you want to think about that again, not just for yourself, maybe your loved ones, if they're less cognizant about taking these things. The fourth one that I want to draw attention to is limiting access. So one of the best preventions is to actually, if you don't use it, then please turn it off. It's just a very good practice. And so many times, like, the defaults are to actually enable everything, as opposed to start with the default of disabling everything. Both Microsoft and Google do take a stance of predominantly opening everything, and you have to take it on yourself to actually close things. So auto forwarding rules are a great place for hackers. So what an auto forwarding rule is, I'm just going to go quickly dip into your email, turn on the forwarding rule, and every time you get an email, I'm going to get a copy of that email. And you don't even recognize that the thing auto forwarded to you. It's not easily seen, always in sent. You rarely check that setting, and the hacker's in and out. There's nothing actually sitting on your application. There's not actually any third-party device or application that's accessing it. They're just siphoning it off. And so auto forwarding rules are like one of the most basic hacking trends. Get your password, go in, turn on the auto forwarding. Now I've got everything. So please make sure you turn off your auto forwarding. The unlocking passwords, that's what they do. So if you haven't turned on two-factor, you have a password, a lot of times you have this very awesome thing that's like, forget password, and you click, and then you get this password, and isn't that fabulous? Now I don't have to remember my password because I had to change it X number of times, and now I'm so crazy, I can't even remember what the heck my password was. You should not have that on your email. Yeah, sure, you can put that on your Team Snap or some piece of information like Netflix where you don't really care. But if it's containing real information, like your email, then you should turn off the ability to forget password and change it, because that's like leaving your door open on your house. It's super easy. You know, yes, people actually do just enter the front door. Sometimes people think hackers are like these awesome masterminds. I'm like, most of the time they're just a statistics person and they're just playing the games, and they run around looking for the forget password. And again, they just try to go in. So you should turn that off. Likewise, browsers have lots of settings that are turned on to open it up and make it free. Lots of the browser settings need to be turned off. And there's a long laundry list. We'll get into it a little bit when we get into your endpoints. Some of those are just privacy settings, but some of those are actually security settings that you want to make sure are getting turned off: access to your calendar, access to your contacts, etc. So you do want to go through each one of these. If you use Safari and you use Firefox and you use Chrome, unfortunately, you need to go through all of these and actually check them. So those are kind of the big, most important four. Obviously, I'm presuming you guys know password vaults and changing passwords and having complex passwords or all of that. But these are probably the main ones that we want to focus on. The next set is kind of getting a little bit deeper into your actual endpoints. As Carol mentioned, your endpoint can be your phone, it can be your iPad, it could be your desktop, it could be your laptop, it could be your kid's laptop, it can even be your security camera. So an endpoint is something predominantly that you interact with and that your data interacts with. So it's both. So it's not your firewall and router, which we'll get to next. It's a piece that both you and your data interact with. So again, here I've got a nice long laundry list for you. I'll quickly run down some of them. The most important ones I'll take onto the next page, but find my laptop, find my phone, super important. You want to know where that is. You can do that on your desktops, your laptops, as well as your phone. Most people think of it only for their phones. You should think of it for your tablets, your Surface, your laptops, knowing where that device is and being able to access it so that you can shut it off or find out. The web camera, people are like, oh, I'm on Teams all the time, I'm on Zoom all the time, I'm on WebEx, I don't want to turn my camera off. You can permission your camera for only certain applications. It does not need to be on all the time. Likewise for your Siri or Alexa or whatever your device is, it should only be on in particular instances. And so if you're actually a hacker, you get $5 for just giving someone access to your laptop webcam. It's between $2 to $5 on the black market to actually access that. So a lot of times, sadly, what they're doing is looking at your kids. Girls and boys are both valuable. You just want that web camera. In the case of the microphone, they're obviously listening. So many people are now good about not necessarily sending their email password to somebody. And they might be good about not putting it up on a sticky phone or a sticky piece of paper on their monitor, hopefully, since you're in the 300 series. But many times we give the password or the credit card over the phone, and we sit here and we say our number. But guess what? Siri's listening to every single thing you say. And if I get access to your microphone, I too am listening to every single thing you say. And yes, people say far more secure things than they may put in their system. So they'll typically say the word credit card, they'll typically say password. So it's very easy to actually trigger and look for the specific rules within your voice. The privacy screen, the privacy settings, locking your phone, having the spam protection, having the malware, making sure your key logger's in there, all of that kind of stuff. Again, it's quite a long laundry list. I'm going to pick on kind of my top ones that you should focus on. So patching is an important one. on your phone, patching means that it's going to download your Apple operating system or your Android operating system and do the update. The phones tend to be easier because you can just set it to auto. Some people don't have it set to auto update, and then they have to remember to go in. Either way, you need to make sure that both your phone, your iPad, your Surface, your laptop are getting updated. People are more cognizant on their phones because it's an auto. They need to make sure that their laptops are also set up to patch. That needs to update the operating system. So Windows has been very good about enabling auto updates there as well. Unfortunately, that's not the only place that you need to update. So that one is very good. Your iOS, if you set it to auto update, it's very good. What about the other things? So we break our patches into 3 or 4 different categories. Your operating system, which is the most important one, is hopefully being auto updated. The second one is your basic applications. So your Outlook, maybe it's Adobe, maybe it's Word, Excel, etc. Those can, in many cases, be updated on a monthly basis. Those tend to get updated and renewed. Then you get into your other applications, right? Your Photoshop or your Netflix or your Uber. Those also need to get updated. The problem here is if you update those, they can revert your settings and get access again. So you need to make sure there's this fine line between auto updating, then all of a sudden your settings went back to basic and you need to check those. So if you auto update, I do like it, but then you still have to put yourself on the review schedule to make sure the settings didn't change when you're in there. And then the new one that a lot of people have been hitting is your devices, your device peripherals. So your camera, your printer. Microsoft, about, 2 months ago, had a situation where the printer, if the printer was on the same place as your operating system, the two had a special niche where they could break through. So you want to sometimes update those. So people say, well, my phone is on a 3-year cycle or a 2-year cycle. My laptop is on a 3-year cycle. Sometimes people milk their laptops till they're dead and they're like, I just email, it's not a big deal. I just do Word documents, it's fine. I don't need the new computer. Well, you might not need the new computer because of your access, but you do need to make sure that all of those devices that are also tied to that computer are updated because people just aren't paying attention to it. And so either milk your computer, but update your device drivers on an annual basis, or flip over your computer, which is going to give you the new device drivers. But people only think of like, oh, I updated my iOS. That's fabulous, certainly the most important one, but it does not do enough. So you need to be very thorough with your patching. Encryption is your next one. Encryption.
Hey, Tanya, can I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to underline like the device drivers and like the hardware piece to it, right? Like that can often be one of the last places that we check, because there's like software and there's lots of like on-off toggles that you can use to help you, assist you there. And sometimes the device drivers are a little bit more esoteric, or sometimes like Windows doesn't always play nice with like the Dell, like if you have a Dell, right? Like whatever manufacturer computer you have doesn't always play nice with like their device driver update system. Sometimes it like kind of suppresses it. And I think it's also important, right? Like your BIOS, which is like really holding together your entire hardware ecosystem. Those are generally being updated on a fairly regular basis and like security patched, frankly. Anyway, I'm just.
Yeah, no, that's thank you for echoing in on that. I think the updates are not always functional based. A lot of times they're security based. And so, yeah, I mean, it's nice to get the new update for, the underlining or the, little paper icon going away or whatever it is. But it's more important to get these security updates. So, in the case of that 0-day threat that came out last week with Apple, if you had your, device set to auto update, you might not have read the newspaper that day, you missed it. It's okay. Apple sent out an immediate release and it would have come down in that patch. So it is very important. That is the most important place, but that is not the only important place. And so people, again, think, oh, I've got that auto update turned on, I'm safe. And then they don't continue to go on to update the other things. So if you're not going to be diligent about every year kind of updating those drivers that no one ever thinks about, then please be very cognizant about getting refreshed devices that will have those actually installed on them. The next one is encryption. Many people have heard about encryption in transit. Now, most websites are encrypting in transit. So if you go to a website, you see the little S, or you see the little lock, things are encrypted in transit. That still does not mean that where you're coming from and where you're going to isn't encrypted. So your header on your actual record being sent is not encrypted unless you're using a VPN to encrypt the headers and so forth. So they know, hey, Tanya's sitting at home, she's going from her home to Amazon. They know that. They don't know exactly what I've said to Amazon. They may know, hey, Tanya emailed, someone at BOS, but they don't know exactly what I said. They can tell the header records. That doesn't really contain a lot of information. That's a privacy setting. That's not a security problem. It's the actual body. But encryption at rest means, is the data when it gets there safe and protected? So on your phone, most phones now thankfully do come encrypted at rest. So if I stole your phone and I actually pulled the chip out and I tried to actually get to the data directly, and I'm sitting in a dark vault and no one can tell I'm accessing your chip, I still can't get to it because the data sitting on the phone is actually encrypted as well. And that tends to be now more the case with phones. A lot of phones are taking care of that, but that is just becoming part of the situation on your endpoint. So your laptops and your workstations, if they're older, meaning 2 years, they probably are not necessarily encrypted at rest. If they're newer, they may be encrypted at rest. Microsoft has started to weave encryption at rest into their Windows 10 operating system. So, sorry, the recording thing just came off. If it's encrypted at rest, that means that even a tech person coming on and pulling out your hard drive would not necessarily need to be able to access that. It's also important, something that I look at, I know that that Carol looks at, when you're doing vendor due diligence of a third-party company and you say Expedia or Amazon or whatever, can they look in the database and get access to it if they're the tech person? So yes, it may be logged in terms of my identity, you'd have to steal my credentials. But if I was the tech person and I had access to that server, could I go in and look? Encryption at rest will help with that, them being able to steal stuff out of the back end. Something very important, you want to do it on your laptops. Make sure that your laptops are encrypted at rest. BitLocker is a very common one that you can use to encrypt your hard drive at rest. That's not to say that when you actually go and throw away your computer and you get your new computer, you want to just throw it in the trash. You don't, even though it's encrypted at rest. I suppose in theory you could. You would still want to wipe it before you throw it away. But at least if this were taken or you left it on the bus or the subway or your plane or whatever else, at least the data is encrypted at rest. They can't pull it out. The next one is unfortunately a little bit more expensive, very difficult sometimes for consumers to do independently, yet it's probably the biggest and best one. So Carol said it was both a 0-day and a 0-click. So I didn't actually have to click to download the malware or something, or click the link to give away my credentials. This is a proactive review. So on your endpoint, on your phone or on your computer, you put a piece of software, and that software is monitoring for irregular behavior. So some of it is artificial intelligence to say, hey, is this unusual that at midnight I'm moving 4 gigs of data off of the actual device? That looks a little bit suspicious. That I've downloaded some piece of software. So a lot of times you'll have your actual spam software, your ransomware software actually help with that. But then you have to actually go be checking it. I don't know about you, but how many times does the tech person forget to go check it, or you forget to go check it? You've got a lot of things going on. So it makes you have to actually go and do it, and you have to react to it. If you have a SOC, the Security Operations Network, that's an actual group of people that just sit around looking at large monitors, looking for flags of irregular behavior. They're being pushed the content immediately when it looks like, there's an unusually large amount of data going out of your laptop or off your phone, or it looks like there's unusual traffic coming into your phone, or all of a sudden some software, they are watching the zero-day threat boards to know, oh, this thing is trying to get access to your phone, and it came through text and we're looking for a specific thing. So they're sitting there, they know Apple hasn't come out with it. They're watching the zero-day threat, and they're sitting there now watching for everything happening on your phone to see this proactive alert. So it is expensive. Again, it comes with the SOC, that Security Operations Center, because you don't have time to sit around monitoring yourself. Your tech person probably doesn't. There's specific packages, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, SentinelOne. They are expensive. They're a per device charge, and there are minimums, which is why it's difficult for sometimes consumers to be able to access this. So the managed service provider, whoever's helping you with your tech, unless you've got the one-man band and they come in and they're great, and you know Jerry and you've known him for 15 years, and Jerry's got access to your house, and he comes in and he does whatever with your webcams, and he does whatever with your security system, and somehow he sets up your Sonos system. He's fabulous. You love him. He's probably not going to have a relationship with these, unfortunately. But if you have a slightly larger group, they will partner with CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or Zscaler and say, hey, look, I have 50 homes that I go into and I take care of all these people. I need it for all of my clients, and they can buy it in bulk for you, making it still expensive, but at least affordable. And so that is something that you should look for in your managed service provider, that person taking care of your house. It's not to say that you necessarily, if you have Jerry, maybe Jerry's great at working with the Sonos system, and that's fabulous. But if you might want to upgrade to have a managed service provider that can at least do and provide these kinds of reselling activities where you couldn't buy it yourself. That's the most important one out of all of them. I mean, obviously having, your passwords and your email and all of that kind of good stuff are all the barriers. This is at the time of problem. If you actually do get into a problem, they also have mechanisms to shut you down. So they will say, this is a level 1 security breach. I'm taking this laptop offline, and they will literally disconnect your laptop from the internet for you. They will turn off your phone. They can actually control it. They could say, hey, that's a little unusual. Let me reach out to the managed service provider and say, hey, it's a little strange that they're downloading this thing, or it's a little strange this data is going out. What do you think? And then if that person contacts you and says, hey, were you sending a ton of videos last night to someone? Because otherwise we've got some suspicious behavior. So they grade the different levels of activity to actually help proactively shut down if something is going on. I've actually seen this in use where they had honeypots, and a honeypot is obviously a sweet little thing that the hackers like to go for, and they catch them in there, and they shut down the device. Your device is protected. The honeypot has done its job. Honeypots are slightly older technology, still very effective, and they come in this package, the CrowdStrike, the Zscaler, the SentinelOne package. And then the worst case scenario is you do get breached. These companies are very good at having a red team that will come in and do the diagnostic. You can layer that on. It's the last piece of their service. They can partner with you to say, where was there something compromised and so forth. What do we need to do? So again, a little bit more expensive, probably needs to be bought through the MSP, the managed service provider, the tech provider. The next one is, again, much like I mentioned with email, you want to make sure on your endpoint you've limited what you have access to. cameras, microphones, Siri, Siri sitting around listening. I don't know. There's this strange disconnect. People want to have it for their car, so dial David, call home, and so forth. It is very nice. Unfortunately, that means that when you leave the car, they're also listening to the rest of the information. That also means that traffic is opened up for people to listen to. The last one is the cookie tracking. Lots of people kind of click on the cookie, comes up on the website. It's this little annoying banner that pops up and you're like, just make this thing go away, accept. Okay, fine, maybe accept it if you know the site, that's fabulous. But when you close the browser, those cookies should go away. And many times those cookies are just sitting there accumulating over time. It's more of a privacy setting than a security setting. So it's not mandatory, though it's often a great place to actually, again, like the auto forwarding, people can siphon off some information or save information on the cookies. So it's a little bit of a hybrid between privacy and security. I would like to see when you close the browser that all cookies get removed from your browser setting. They're saving a little piece on your computer that's tracking some information. Some cookies are harmless and only tracking what you're doing on that particular site. Some cookies are actually doing a little bit more and tracking a little bit more. So I just say, hey, unfortunately, I have to make sure that if there's one bad person in the mix, everybody has to get wiped out. It's kind of nice that some cookies are there, but I have to assume there's one that's not going to be so friendly. Let's get rid of it.
One quick question, Tanya.
Yeah.
We have a question coming in. Back to the third-party providers. We have a question from one of our attendees about whether we should be concerned about third-party providers getting access to our data.
Is the third-party provider your MSP or the CrowdStrike SentinelOne?
Maybe address both.
Okay.
Let's talk about the CrowdStrike SentinelOne, which you were just talking about, and then the managed service provider.
Yeah, well, I guess I asked that question, but in both cases, due diligence on your vendors is super important. In the case of CrowdStrike, Zscaler, SentinelOne, they're very big security-based focused firms. I've done due diligence on them. I feel very good about them watching my information and the traffic. They tend to watch just the headers. You've got your stuff encrypted at rest, and you have your stuff encrypted in transit when you're going to the website. And so typically they're just looking at the headers, just like everybody else. So even I personally protect lots of people with, billions of dollars. I do personal family office security. And so even if I'm protecting people whose names you would hear in the news, they use these as well. It's a great line of defense. Yes, they may know that I'm emailing David and so forth, but they're not able to see the content within there. And so it's just the header. They're looking at massive, massive levels of information and many, many people. So they're not concerned with what's in your content. They're public companies, they're well traded. The MSP is a little bit harder to actually do diligence on. Your tech people, the person that's coming in, yes, Jerry, he's great, okay, that's fabulous, but Jerry doesn't unfortunately know much about CrowdStrike. He's great at working like, your Apple TV and your Sonos system, and maybe like, helping you when you've locked out of your phone or something, or making sure your phone's being backed up. The MSPs, the ones that are a little bit more institutional grade, those are hard to do diligence on. You want to, do you use subcontractors? Do you, follow best practices? What's your policy statement and so forth? How do you track my information? Those questions are very relevant. This is not one person anymore. It's a little team of people, and they're institutional grade. So they're trying to actually scale. That means that more than one person that is going to have access. So you do want to validate your MSP. They're not big publicly traded companies. And just because they're in tech doesn't mean that they eat their own food, right? So you do want to actually make sure that you are checking them. So I think then we're over to networks. The last piece, the piece that's the least understood. So again, we're in the 300 series. I'm going to do a little bit of an education. So we have domain names. Domain name is Amazon.com, Expedia.com, The Gap. It's the name that's meaningful to you because you can't remember the address. So just like I love David, I'd go, hey, let's go to David's house. I don't actually say, oh, we're going to 123 Woodlock Road because I don't remember his address. Just say, hey, we're going to David's house. Same thing, right? I'm going to The Gap. I'm going to Amazon. I don't remember their silly little numbers. The number is actually the address. So it's much like the house address, right? 123 Woodlock. In this case, most people, actually everybody, is using IPv4. It's an IP address. It's a series of numbers. You may have seen them before. 0 through 155, 0 through 155.0. It's this 4-part number with these dots between it. That's your IP address. And so that's just a nice way of basically saying, this is the computer out there in the world. This is the router. This is the firewall out there in the world that I'm trying to get to. And I don't want to actually remember that name. So I remember the domain name. So there are people that just sit around saying, here's the actual number for the actual name. If the Gap moves their servers, you don't need to know about it. They're just going to update the number, and this directory is going to tell you. So that's your domain name. And we're using IPv4, which was built back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, depending on when you actually think of it being publicly accessible. And we have only so many of those. I think there are 4 billion numbers available, but unfortunately we have more computers and devices than 4 billion. Yeah, thank you. So we have more than 4 billion actual devices available. And so every one of those devices gets a number, but that's not enough. So when I'm inside my house, I have numbers for all of my stuff. So it basically allows me to say every firewall or router actually gets a number, and otherwise they don't need numbers. They'll have private network numbers. So this is like if you have 2 apartment buildings, they both have apartment 4 in their thing. I'm able to reuse the number 4. Apartment A has number 4, apartment B is number 4. But to the outside, apartment, the building address for A is different than the building address for B. And so the number 4 is on the internal network side, and the address to the outside is available. And that's how we've gotten around the fact that we have more devices than 4 billion in the world, yet there are only 4 billion actual addresses out there. That secures, you create your own private network. When you get your router, the little device that your Verizon Optimum guy comes with, they put it on there, and that gives you the address to the outside. So your home got a public address that everybody knows, and they can access it. Even if you don't have a domain name, it actually has that number associated with it. Obviously, you're not hosting a website. You don't need people to remember your domain, your IP address, so you're fine. That is controlled by the actual internet provider that you've got. That is not secure. They do have a little tiny bit of security in there, not a lot. Unfortunately, people go, oh, now I've got access and I've got Verizon. Isn't this fabulous? Now I've got Comcast and I'm up on the internet. You actually need to put a firewall behind that little thing. Many people don't even change the actual password for the router. It comes with a username and a password. And almost every Verizon guy or Optimum guy knows what that is. And they use the same one because they got to go to a lot of houses. So they all remember what it is, or they can look it up, or it sits on actually the device itself. So you can walk over to the device, look on the back, and it says the password to the thing. Yeah, that's handy, but not a great way to go. Everybody's got access to it. So behind the router, you want to put a firewall. That is something that the ISP, your Verizon, your Comcast, your internet service provider is not in control of. These are not terribly expensive devices. You don't need an industrial grade $10,000 one. You can buy a simple $500 one. It's not terribly expensive, and it sits behind your router to protect you from the outside to your inside network, and that's super important. So that's your firewall. In that firewall,
can I just jump in there real quick, Tanya?
Sure.
And I'll make this super fast. Just a little quick, as a part of preparing for these. I actually went out recently and bought a hardware firewall. The one that I bought was called Firewalla, Firewalla. And I got the gigabit one, which is the fastest one that they actually make. And it has an app that comes along with it. I literally kind of scanned a QR code. It was up on the network within like 5 minutes. And the alerts and the amount of additional just kind of peace of mind that I feel from it operating on the network and knowing that it's working. It has all kinds of somewhat esoteric, but like I was able to see like my laptop was communicating with Xbox Live. And I'm like, what are you doing? I don't want you communicating with Xbox Live. And I had the ability to like stop that immediately, and it remembers and then sets up a rule for you. And it was very app-based and intuitive. And so that's my testimonial for firewalls.
Yeah, so firewalls are super important. There are software firewalls and hardware firewalls. Software firewalls will be very important for your phone. But more important is the hardware firewall that you have in your house. Again, not terribly expensive. The average lifespan of your hardware firewall is 5 to 7 years. So you think about, a couple $100 spent over 5 to 7 years. You do have to patch it on an annual basis, or ideally on a quarterly basis. So it's a device just like every other device. You cannot let it just sit there. It does need to get updated and loved. But as David points out, it's not as intimidating as you might think. So you have your router. It's the dumb little thing that helps you translate the outside to the inside. You have your firewall, which you put in to protect yourself. And then a switch. A switch is like an extension cord. I need to plug in 5 things and I only have 2 outlets. That's your switch. It's not terribly smart. Those are super cheap. They actually all look alike. If you look at your router, it's like this black thing with like 5 places that you put network cords. You look at your firewall, it's like this the blue thing, and you put 5 cords in it, or however many cords. You look at your switch, it's also a long thin thing where you put a lot of cords in it. They are very different. Your router is controlled by the outside. That gives you your internet. Your firewall protects you, and your switch is nothing more than saying, oh, I needed 5 places to plug in my network. Okay, great. It's not doing anything other than that. So you do need to double check that. In your firewall, we have ports. There are lots of ports. Even if you buy the most basic firewall, everybody's agreed to the ports. So on here's the little cheat sheet, the common ports, like how do you get your email? That's one port. How do you get your files? People tend to not put files in and out. If you're a company, maybe, but if you're actually a consumer, you're probably not even using files. How do you go out to the internet? Okay, you're streaming Netflix or whatever. Each one of these has a different port. There are a lot of ports, and they're all standardized on there. You're probably using 5 of them, maybe 5. You want to turn off the other ports and just shut them down, because they'll sit there and ping those other ports. They sit behind your IP address. They're trying to come in. They'll try to get through those other ports, and you don't even recognize that they're open. So you want to close down the other ports. It's amazing that actually almost all of your traffic goes out, one port. You're mostly getting to the web. You've got your email and your web, your big 2. The rest of them probably, for the most part, can get shut down. So your internal network has its own IP addresses. Your external network, the public, has the ones that have names associated with them. That's the public network. Your firewall sits between them and protects them. Your router sits there and translates through between your internal and your external. So it's doing the name translation between the 2 networks. So IPv4, I'm getting a little bit now into, some terms that you may hear thrown around. This is now just kind of fun educational stuff. IPv6 has a number that we can't even say, like 37 trillion gazillion IP addresses. It's a 128-bit number. It's a very big number of addresses because we realized 4 billion wasn't enough. We got a lot more with IPv6. Unfortunately, we kind of all need to go there. So this has been available for a long time. And most of your firewalls and your computers and your phones can deal with both addresses. Unfortunately, the ISPs, the big people that do these domain name translations, they have to do one or the other, and they're going to have to redo all of their infrastructure. And all of them need to redo all of their infrastructure before we can fully convert onto IPv6. But as these two pictures illustrate, IPv4, that's our current way of addressing all of the things, the Amazon, the Gap, the bank, the grocery store, that is on this old IP address naming scheme. And whether I'm going to Amazon or I'm streaming Netflix or I'm on a very important security briefing Zoom call, they're all treated the same kind of way, and it's very difficult to navigate the traffic. So it's much like being on a street in Mumbai. I may have a goat, I may have a cart, and I may have a car, and I may have a BMW, and they're all on the same road. And unfortunately, you know, as fast as you want in your BMW, you still have to go around all the cows on the actual street. IPv6 is much like a very well-oiled 128-bit road where everybody gets a different speed, and we kind of break up the actual channels and the different lines. And if you're in the Porsche, you get to go on this one. And if you're, you know, in the cart, you get to go on this one. If you're in the bicycle lane, you get to go at different speed, much more faster and efficient. We will be moving there. I think people hear about, you know, G5 networks and these networks. This is a network that's also equally important. It's just the way we name everything. So the whole IP address naming scheme, hopefully at some point will change. Then people hear about the web. They hear about, obviously, the web we know about, right? Amazon, the Gap, the bank, the whatever, Wikipedia, anything that's searchable. So if I go to Google or I go to Bing and I type in my search, that's considered the web, the part that we see. There's a lot of stuff that's in the web that's not actually able to be searched on. So if I can't search on it, then it's not considered, actually, it's considered the deep web. It's not that deep. It could just be all the stuff that's in someone's SharePoint library. And I have to actually be within the SharePoint library, or I have to be within the email system to be able to search it. It might be on the web, but it's not freely accessible. I needed credentials. It's not indexed and searched by Google or Bing or what have you. Again, your emails could be considered that, documents can be considered that. Different databases of information can be considered that, medical records can be considered that. People think that the deep web is very scary. It's not really that scary. Most of it is totally fine. It's just behind some permission to access and not being indexed by the big engines. It may just be indexed by the individual application itself. The part that's scary is the dark web. It's a very small portion. A lot of times those are not actually even having that domain name. So when I said the Gap and it represents a number, okay, that's great. You know, I can remember it, or Amazon, I don't need to remember it. This place is where, obviously, you know, if I'm going to sell porn, or I'm going to sell your password, or I'm going to sell access to your webcam, this is where I can put it. And it's a place I don't actually put like porn.com here. I put just the IP address, and then only the people that have that random address can get in. And usually I have 4 IP addresses. People consider it onions or layers, where you have to kind of go through a couple different barriers to get in to the actual place that holds the content, the pictures, the addresses, and so forth. It is a relatively small piece. It's not generally accessible by just going to your regular browser. There's special browsers that enable you to go there. Or in many times, people aren't using browsers, you're using just kind of back-end technology to get there. It does actually exist. By the time a new study just came out, by the time your password is actually breached, or you know, the information is exposed, it typically is taking almost a year to make it into the dark web for resale. It's still known throughout that period So sometimes people will have systems that will actually scan the dark web, actually trying to figure out, was anything breached? Do you have my password? LinkedIn, great example. There was a big breach about, I don't know, 8 years ago. If that was your password, I hope you're not reusing it for anything. You know, they can see all of your passwords. They can see what your pattern is. Oh, here she used her mother's name. Here she used her father's name. Here she's using her street address. They can figure out your pattern. So then the next time they go to the site, they've got a pattern. Yes, there are a lot of combinations, but it's dramatically limiting the number of combinations they have to actually use for your passwords. But it is taking, so by the time you find out that you've been breached, you're almost about, 3/4 throughout the year before it's actually kind of semi-public on the dark web. It can be accessible before it's actually found and searched in there. That's not to say I wouldn't monitor that. You can do free tools to actually monitor it. You can just go into a couple of different ones, spyclouds.com. You can go there, type in your email address, type your kid's email address, have a little laugh that your kid's email address is out there and that his 5 passwords that he's used recently. Chances are it's probably out there. Sites that your kids are going to are much more likely to be breached and not brought into the news. And chances that your child's changing their password are also much more likely. And yet their webcams are popular. Yep.
I think we're
Get
beyond
to
time, and I just want to be respectful of people's time. So I think we're gonna wrap, like the speed round and the words. I think a lot of those acronyms will be defined in the ebook. So I think we're good on that. And then I'll just kind of like pass it to Carol, unless there's some final things you want to say, Dr. Neal.
No, thank you. I'm so sorry.
I think we could listen to you for hours, Dr. Neal. I mean, you have so much knowledge and expertise, and it's just been a treat to hear your insight and your information. I think we all have taken away some good implementation tasks ahead of us. I do think it's just so important to think about what it is that we can control and what it is that we can't control, so that we're not going to be able to control the hack into Apple, but we can do the right things within our system and our control, our network, our email, our endpoints, to make sure that we're as prepared as possible to weather those storms. So thank you for the insight, and we will definitely be sharing the materials from the webinar, and the whole webinar will be viewable on our website if anybody wants to listen to it again or pick out certain elements of it. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.